Yeah. So let's just jump in, man. I want to talk a lot about your relationship with God, but how it all started from like when we were in Big Red Rooster. So for anybody who doesn't know Big Red Rooster, you were managing our band, Big Red Rooster, and it fizzled out, like 2010-ish?
Yeah.
And then what kind of made you turn to God and a life of faith after the band kind of fizzled out?
Yeah. Well, it really started when the band was kind of at its prime, I would say. I was getting my master's in business from SMU, like a great business school, and making money throwing parties.
Good parties.
Making a lot of money throwing good parties, having fun. The band was touring nationally, and so just living like the dream life for a 24-year-old or whatever. So from the outside looking in, like that, I did whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, right? Yeah. And was, in a great school and all these things. But it was just empty. And the person I was dating at the time was like, "You're not the type of guy I want to marry." And I was like, "Well, I'm not the type of guy I want to be." And that really kind of started it. And so I started going to this thing called The Porch at Watermark. It's young adults. It's basically like church made applicable to young adults. It's all the messages and everything are about, young adult issues or things that are relevant to you.
So, can I interrupt
real
quick?
Always.
When you said you weren't the kind of guy you wanted to be, what was that?
Well, I was just, living, I was sleeping around with girls all the time, just partying, addicted to weed. It was just not a lifestyle that I knew I want to be in forever. Right. And it was, like I said, from a worldly sense, it was the dream life. Right.
Right.
But it was just empty, it would leave me feeling with regrets, and I would mask those regrets by just doing it again, numbing my convictions, weed to, just forget about it. And so I, rewind a little bit. I had put my trust in Jesus as my Lord and Savior when I was 8 years old. And then just through the course of worldly success and partying and all these other things, just drifted. And so just numbing my convictions of what I knew was right by continuing to do what was wrong. And the enemy uses guilt and shame to cause you to do further destruction, right? So like true conviction leads to repentance. Guilt and shame is a tool of the enemy that you're supposed to be free from as a believer, but the enemy uses that to just drive you into further destruction. And so, I started going to Watermark, and the pastor was up there talking about like porn and partying, and like I grew up in a Southern Baptist church, like they didn't talk about that stuff. Right. And I'm like, okay, this guy I can relate to, and so I just kept going back. And at first, like I was doing it for my girlfriend at the time, and it wasn't really all for God, and so it was a little bit hollow, and I had to have that like removed from my life to be able to like fully pursue God. And that was kind of more of the 2010 time frame. And so I just kept going back because it was like, man, living authentically, transparently was what this guy was teaching. And it was just powerful. And so I kept going back, and I realized that things in my past, I would self-condemnate. You know what I mean? Like I would beat myself up for things, and I couldn't forgive myself for certain things. And so I realized as I was going through that, I got in a small group and doing a book study. There was something in a book. It says, by not forgiving yourself for, whatever, you're looking at Jesus on the cross saying that's not enough for me. And so like I'd always accept God's forgiveness and conceptually understood that he forgave me, but I wouldn't forgive myself. And so, Romans 8:28, there's no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And so I realized that I had been, holding this guilt and shame. And then like, as I confessed all my sins to my small group and everything in my past, I felt free, free from guilt and shame, free from any baggage that caused.
Right.
And And we would just meet every week and just live life authentically and transparently, which is the way we were created to live, right? Mm-hmm. Like, think about like anything you have hidden, like that takes control over you, right? And
I think with the guilt thing, I think there's a balance, right? Because if you're feeling guilt, then you know that there's something you're doing that's wrong, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, you know that that's taking you to a certain point. I feel this guilt because I've done these things. But once you acknowledge those things and you've changed your actions, then that's when you got to let those go, right? That's the idea. It's like, if you're feeling guilt because you're doing bad things, then that's different than doing the right things and then still feeling that guilt. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's well said. And to take, just to kind of have a quick step back, just to articulate the gospel, like every other world of religion believes that if you follow a certain set of rules, you can work your way up to be good enough to be with God, or be good enough to be reincarnated into the next level, or to achieve, Zen state.
Right.
And so, it's all, every other religion except for Christianity, that is the core belief system. And the difference of Christianity is saying, if God is perfect and we are not, like perfection cannot have relationship with anything that is imperfect. You know what I mean? It just doesn't work. You can't have perfection and imperfection in relationship with one another. And so Christianity is the only one that says, hey, we can never be good enough to earn our way up to God. And so it took God, Jesus, becoming a man and living a sinless life. And because he was both God and man, his sacrifice, by him laying his life down as a sacrifice, was an eternal sacrifice because he was God and man, but he lived the sinless life to pay for our sins. And so by trusting in that alone, I can get to heaven and not anything of myself. And so that's what frees you from the guilt and the shame. And that's why picturing Jesus, who I believed in as my Lord and Savior, up on the cross, bleeding out, and suffering a horrible death, looking at him and saying, that's not enough for me, was like the sucker punch. I'm like, dude, I'm here. I am like self-condemnating. And like, by me doing that, I'm looking at him and saying, that's not enough. When in reality, like Jesus either paid for all of your sins or none of them. Like he was either the Lord or he was either a liar and a lunatic, And so, and through that period, I was also I did a lot of studying because I'd believed these things from when I was a child and was taught that. So I couldn't help but think like, is this real? Like, do I just believe this because I was, informed of this and taught this way?
Right.
And so I spent a lot of time in that. And as I was rededicating my life to Christ, like I studied every other world religion, and studied apologetics and a lot of it, which is just the defense of Christianity, and just studied a lot and just came to what really struck me was what I go back to, in moments of doubt, is Jesus dying was a historical fact, being crucified, as is his, the tomb was empty. Also, that's a historical fact recognized by everyone in the world. And so what happened in that, to his body is to be believed by different people, different things. Sure. The thing that really struck me as really affirming my faith, other than also a lot of other things, like the prophecies are just unimaginably, just the mathematics that he could fulfill all those prophecies is mind blowing. But what really struck me was all the 12 disciples, or 11 of them, they fled when Jesus was crucified. They were terrified. And Peter, his number one follower, denied him 3 times. And all of those guys, something happened drastically because they all went on to die martyrs' deaths. Other than John, they couldn't kill him. They had to throw him on an island. But they all went on to die like horrible, suffering deaths in the name of Jesus. And so let's say they had decided to like conspire and let's start a religion and change the world, right? One of them would have given up as they were being, burned to death or crucified upside down. Yeah. But those guys all... So something happened, and that's where I'm like, okay, it's a fact that he died. It's a fact that the tomb is empty, and these guys all say they saw him along with hundreds of other people, and so like they went on to die for that. And that really helped affirm my faith. Like I said, the prophecies, I don't have the numbers up. It's been a while since I studied all that, but the mathematical chance in him fulfilling all of them is like more than trillions, 1 in trillions. It's quite a bit more than that. And so, that helped me solidify my faith. And then just evidence, my faith was continued reaffirmed as I lived transparently, as I followed the way that God had taught me. I went to this thing called Launch Retreat, where it's like a camp for adults, young adults. And I went there, and it was like the biggest party ever for 3 days over Labor Day weekend. And I remember leaving. I said, that's the most fun I've ever had. And I did not touch a girl. I did not get drunk or high. And I have no regrets. And I was like, this is the way God created us to live, is to be able to have fun without those things, or use those things and, in coupling, not use that to have the fun. Right.
Yeah.
And just to live transparently without regrets. And so that was kind of the big turning point for me.
That's great, man. And so fast forward to getting married or getting engaged, getting married. That was what? 2015, something like that.
Yeah. Yep. Good job. Yeah.
And then
we got married in 2015. Yeah.
I was DJing the. Was it the engagement party? Is that what it was? Yeah. And you guys got married, and then I want to talk about your kids, having your story behind that. You guys went through IVF treatment after getting married, and you had, just in case for anybody watching, IVF is basically where they take the woman's egg, and then they take the sperm, they put the sperm in the egg, and then they turns into an embryo, and then they implant the embryo back in the
exactly.
So you went through a few rounds of IVF.
Yeah, I think we did 5 total IVF, and then like 8 IUIs, which is where like artificial insemination. The medicated IUIs were they give the woman a bunch of drugs to help her produce as many eggs as possible, and then they artificially inseminate the sperm into her, and so none of those were successful.
And that's a lot on compared to normal standards, like what most people try, right? Most people right? Usually like once or twice, because they're costly too, right?
So expensive, yeah.
So you went through a lot, and how long did that take? Over what period of time did that take?
Yeah, so I think we did like the first we started with IUIs, right, and then quickly we realized Ashley is a low egg reserve, and so even back then they were like, oh, she could go into menopause any moment, and so that incited the rush, so to speak, the expedited approach. And we did 3 rounds before Lucy and like 5 IUIs, and got pregnant from none of them. That was probably, we were trying for 2 years, two and a half years before we got pregnant with Lucy. And so
wait, you were trying for 2.5 years after you had stopped doing.
No. Okay. That was like including. So we started trying for like 6 months, and Ashley's like, I think something's off. She just had an intuition. And so she went to get checked out. That's when they found the low egg reserve. And they're like, you need to try, your window's very short. You need to try alternative methods. Started with IUI, IVF, then alternated kind of some in between. And so that was, and then we kept trying naturally. And then, we finally, we took a break from it, and got pregnant naturally. I remember I got to a point I said, okay, let's do this. She'd always talked about building a house. And so I was like, do you want to build a house or go travel Europe? I was like, I'd rather do the traveling, but I'm about experiences. But she said just build a house. So we chose that. And then we got pregnant within like a couple months. Like it was like, wow. And the first time we hadn't tried and we got pregnant, it was just all natural. I often say like, it was really God likes to stack the deck against himself so that he can flex. You know what I mean? And so like literally we were inserting semen into an egg.
Right.
And because you can do it both ways. Where you describe what's in a petri dish together and they naturally, or you can like insert it into it.
Right.
So we were literally like creating life.
Trying to get 90%. You were 90% of the way there.
Yeah. And like God was just saying like, that's cute. Like you can try to create life, but I'm the true creator and sustainer of life. And like, you can try to control everything you can. And it's really hard in the moment because like, especially as a husband, like the thing you want to give your wife the most is a baby, but that's what she wants the most. Yeah. And it's like, you have no control over it. Yeah. And it's such a humbling experience.
I don't know if you remember this, but at Phil's wedding, you came up to me and you're like, this was in the crux of it all. And you came up to me and you were like, you lucky bastard. You don't essentially saying you don't know how lucky you are because Ellie had just been born.
Yeah.
You know? So I can imagine going through all that stuff going through your head, like, we've been trying, like, and I'm sure that, like, did that test your faith, would you say?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, everything's, test your faith. Like, trials make your faith more mature and complete, lacking nothing, right? So like all trials are for our good if you can have the perspective to see it. And so I think in the midst of it, I had some pretty unwavering faith, and it was, you're just so in the thick of it. But every time somebody get pregnant, it was particularly hard for my wife. For me, I was able to just be excited for people.
Yeah.
But for Ashley, that was really hard as everybody around you is getting pregnant.
Sure.
And she's one of 5 or 8 actually, 5 biological, 3 adopted. So she'd always wanted a big family. Like all she'd ever wanted to be since she was a little girl was a mom. She started babysitting at like 7 or 8 years old. Yeah, it was really hard on her, and that was what was hard for me.
Yeah.
Was to not be able to give her the things she wanted the most. And yeah, I mean, the thing about it is like, you just got to be real with God. Like, you see David like crying out to him in the Psalms, like yelling at God. And I think that's the most important thing in your struggles. And as you deal with loss in life, it's like, why, God? Like just be real, right? Like, why would you allow this to happen? I cannot understand. This is so wrong. Like we would be great parents. Like, this is all she wants. Like, why would you allow this to happen? And then just like, and then in the midst of that, as you get all that off your chest, you just surrender to it. Like, I know when I can't understand, your hand and what you're doing, I'll trust your heart. Like your will be done, not mine. I know that you're good and I know that you're in control. And so while I can't understand why in the heck you'd be letting this crap happen, fill in the blank, doesn't need to be infertility, loss, whatever, loss of job, anything. It's like, I can't understand this, but I'm choosing to trust you. And that's where the power is, man. But you have to do the proper steps of the grief, right? Like, you've got to be real with your emotions and cry out to God. Like, that's where I think a lot of people miss is like, I'm just like, Ashley did this actually. She would just put she calls it the Jesus Band-Aid on it. Through that whole thing, she was just so in the grind. She's like, it's going to be okay. Like, I'm putting the Jesus Band-Aid on, but she was never really dealing with the grief and the trauma that we were going through. And so like, she's since learned how to properly lament with God and just like cry out to him and express your grief to him, and that's where he's able to meet you. And you can't just say, oh, everything's going to work out according to the good of all those who trust in Jesus. That's a verse that have people quote all the time, and it's like, yeah, that's true, but you can't just use that as a mask, right? Like, you've got to actually like be real with yourself.
Feel those feelings.
Feelings, yeah, and like talk to God about it, because like he already knows what you're feeling and thinking.
Yeah.
So you might as well be real.
Yeah, exactly. He already knows. So how long after you guys stopped did you actually conceive?
Man, it was
roughly.
It was like a few months, like 4 or 5 months.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
and then, so that was Lucy May, and then you had Georgia. How many years later?
Well, yeah. So we also lost one. So we did 2 more rounds of IVF, and we were actually going to do a medicated IUI. And I was leaving for India for a mission trip, and the timing didn't sync up of when I was going to leave, and according to the doctor. And so, they canceled the IUI, and we're like, well, let's just be, so we of course tried before I left. And when I got home, of course, needed it when I got home. And we got pregnant, and it was so, and she had, it's a trisomy. I can't believe I'm drawing a blank on this right now. Parker. Anyways, it's a chromosomal issue, and so we lost her at 14 weeks, and that was really hard. And then we started trying again right after, and I can't recall I don't think we'd done any IVF or IU. I think maybe a couple IUIs. And we were getting ready to go to this doctor. Actually, we went to this doctor in Colorado Springs. And we were about to, and this is the best doctor in the world for IVF. And we did the whole like day up there with like all the testing, all these things. And we came back to came back home, and Ashley'd been dealing with like some health issues for the last like 2 years where her health had just been deteriorating. And so this doctor had found mold in her system, that she had mold, and that was, she's allergic to mold. There's like 15% of people that can't detox mold properly. She's in that category. And so anyways, we canceled the IVF. And we're like, let's figure this out. At that time, we found out that our house had been overtaken with mold. We were living in a toxic amount of mold. We had lost our house overnight. We had to move out.
This was a new build too, by the way, right?
Yeah. It was kind of a remodel. Like it was, we took it, all we kept was the foundation. Okay. But the foundation was the issue. When they rebricked the house, they didn't cut the proper ventilation in. And so mold was growing underneath our house. Also a great analogy for like sin and destruction in your life. Anything you're hiding in your life, like it's growing.
You got to vent
and
that
it's going to take, it's going to destroy you in the end, anything you're hiding. And so it was like underneath us, we had no idea. Moved out overnight, lived in a friend's back house for 6 months, remediated the house and sold it. And when we moved into our friend's back house, we got pregnant. So like in the midst, and it's kind of like this theme, even with our third, it's like in the midst of chaotic seasons, I think the mold had a huge part of it, because like, your body is connected to everything. I mean, she was this point where like she's extroverted, and she wouldn't even want to like go out and talk to people because she couldn't remember names, and like just really exhausted all the time. It was debilitating.
Yeah. Well, the thing how long did that go on for her?
It had been like a year and a half. Yeah, it was just getting worse and worse.
Like, what's going on?
Yeah, just getting worse and worse and worse. And like even Lucy had like dark circles under her eyes for the first year and a half of her life. We never knew why. Moved out, they were gone.
Wow.
But so then so that was one of the hardest seasons we've ever been through, losing our house. That's what broke Ashley. Was she'd been putting, as she called it, the Jesus Band-Aid on it all this up until that point. And when she lost our house that she'd built, she designed every aspect of our house, like poured her heart and soul into it. Was incredible. Did an incredible job. Like we went on vacations with our neighbors. We had a cul-de-sac, 25 kids on it. It was like a perfect, and so that was what broke her. And then God's, immediately gave us the greatest gift that we could ever ask for, in Hurricane Georgia being conceived. Call her Hurricane Georgia for a reason, but because she's a hurricane. She's going to consume or destroy whatever comes in her path.
Sounds like Luke.
So it must be a second-born thing. But anyways, and then. And then with the fourth pregnancy, we didn't pursue any IVF or IUIs, but we'd been trying for a year or so, and then we kind of, Ashley was like, hey, we had some big travel plans over the summer. She's like, I don't want to be pregnant over the summer, like. Yeah, just let's hit pause on it, trying for a little bit. Yeah. And then we got pregnant without trying.
Wow. Do you think, and looking back, that the exposure to the mold had anything to do with her actual egg count as well? Do you think that had?
Potentially. I mean, I think it, your body is so interconnected that like every aspect of it is, connected to everything.
Like once her health got,
I think her egg, the way they measure that is a little bit, I don't have a lot of confidence in the methodology of that measurement. Yeah. So I always kind of doubted that in the back. And it's a tricky thing as a husband to navigate the infertility world, because you want to give your wife the thing that she wants the most, and you have to make her feel heard and understood. But you also like have to balance reality and like what's doable, know? So that was tricky, but.
Did that change your outlook? Obviously, you'd already have a lot of faith, but the fact that you had been trying so long with IVF and then have children naturally like that, did that change your outlook on spirituality or your faith, or did it just strengthen it?
It strengthened it for sure. Yeah. I mean, it's just like I know why. Like I've always been able to. This is gonna sound arrogant, but I feel like it's true. It's like I've always been able to get most of what I want in life. And like that's like one thing that you can't control, like right? You have no control over.
Yeah. How did you come to terms with that? Like
it was just tough, man. Especially when it's not even when it's something you want to give for somebody else, even more so.
Right.
And it really been the challenging part for me more so has been my whole life. All I've wanted is a son, to name him after my dad and my grandfather. And I'd gotten to a place of like I just always trusted and hoped that would happen, either one way or the other, through adoption or naturally. and Ashley's like, God doesn't promise us that, It's like, I don't know how grounded that is, that you're just hoping in that. But like when we found out Georgia was a girl, like I was heartbroken, like our boy, a girl. And so that's been like the God continue, like it wasn't enough for me to get the girls, right? It was like God's holding out on the thing that I want the most last, right? Mm-hmm. And it was like, for me, it's just, I'm not a naturally patient person. And so just like continuing to build patience and like trust and surrender, it's like control is just an illusion. Like we really have no control over anything.
I completely agree.
And agree. It just he had to get me to a place of like just complete surrender and trust before.
Yeah. You can stack up everything in your favor as much as possible. There's an old Stoic story about William Tell, who shot the arrow, the apple over his sons with the arrow,
Yeah.
And he lined up the shot and he let go of the arrow. But after that, no matter what, there's an outcome that's going to come, and a lot of that's out of your control,
Yeah, a lot of that's parenting too, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I think with the arrow analogy of a parent, it's like you can launch that kid in the direction that you want it to go, but a bird could fly by and hit it,
so much is out of your control.
The wind could blow,
And accepting those things. The hard part is I think for me especially too, and I think for most people, is just acceptance on things that you can't control is like one of the hardest things for us to do.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Good.
Speaking of acceptance, when we, a big part of acceptance is losing family, losing people that we love. And I know you've gone through 2 big losses this year.
Yeah.
Your grandmother passed, and then Adam, was that this?
Yeah, it was June 5th.
June.
Yeah, March and June.
Yeah.
It's been a rough year, man. It's been an interesting year. Because our business has been like booming and super stressful. Normally when it's booming, that's a great thing. But when you're manufacturing, like rapid growth is not a good thing because you have constraints.
Right.
And then losing my grandmother. Also, I have a business that we're starting up that I'm invested heavily in. That's requires a lot of time, and so and then I'm chairman of the board of Watermark CDC, which is a community development corporation.
There's a lot going on there.
Yeah, and so like just so much going on, and then like losing my grandmother, she got dementia. And it was just a rapid decline, and we lost her unexpectedly. In a long-term memory care place. But it was ultimately an answer to prayer. And, it's been a tough year, man. And then losing Harvey, Adam, is his first name. I call him Harvey. One of my best friends since I was a little kid, was definitely like, it's still super hard,
He was a good guy. I mean, last time I saw him was at your old place off Greenville.
Yeah. He was a lot of fun, man. And, but I'm super thankful that, especially with him, he almost died a bunch of times, through his, liver had failed and he had a transplant, didn't go well. But the last like year that I had with him, I just really maximized it, and just made a bunch of great memories and talked about, real life and his faith and understanding that where he had, come to and, really grown. And he really had struggled a lot with shame and guilt, as well. And so seeing him be freed from that was just super rewarding. And so it's hard, man. And his was pretty unexpected as well. He had a seizure. And, so I think it's, when it's hard no matter what, but that's why I always say, like, I tell, like, say I love you to people when you hang up the phone with them, or when you see them, like every time. Mm-hmm. I learned that from, when Matt Mills died, remember?
Yep.
And like the last thing I had said to him in an email, like a month before, was I love you, And I was like, dude, I'm just so thankful that was the last thing I said. So like whoever I'm talking to, like all my friends, I just always try to say I love you when I leave, or
you have no idea when it can happen. There's I've tried to look around for different areas for faith, and I've been going down the route of Stoicism recently. It's a philosophy, and there's a philosophy, part of the philosophy, a principle called memento mori, which basically means know you're going to die, and it's something that you need to do on a regular basis, on a daily basis, and it's not not from a negative standpoint. It's to be able to understand that even your children laying in bed, could pass away that night. And it's not to lament it or to be negative.
To live for the moment.
It's to live in the moment, right? It's to appreciate them when they're here and to remind you that anything could just end like right then, right there. And so for them, and a lot of times it's happened to loved ones. I've had what's essentially a grandparent to Ellie and Luke. Kathy passed away in a fire just like that. All of a sudden one night, we're like, what? Carla's uncle or her great uncle a few weeks ago passed away because he walked out of bed, lost his footing, slipped, hit his head, and broke his neck and died. Like, wow, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And so knowing that could happen at any point in time, it's a constant reminder to be living in the moment for sure.
Yeah. There's a Bible verse called, that David, in a prayer in the Psalms, that says, "Teach me to number my days, Lord." And what the heart behind that is the same thing you were just talking about. If you number your days and you know that you're here for a finite amount of time, like live with no regrets, right? Yeah. Like soak in every moment. And especially in the culture we live in, where we're constantly distracted and live, our phones and just consumed by so many, everything vouching for our attention. Yeah. It's like that's, especially as a parent, like be in the moment right now. Like put your phone away and like cuddle your kid, and just soak up every moment. And like same thing with like living with, knowing Adam was not here for forever, and just making the most of the time I had with him, and that allows you to, if you do that, you're going to live an intentional life. And Absolutely. That's the whole mindset, it's like live intentionally.
How do you, being busy as you are with all the projects and work you've got going on, being in the CEO of All Metals, it's like a big responsibility. How do you keep that facet of staying present when you're basically got a lot of responsibility and stuff on your plate? And how do you switch that off? For me, I have a hard time. I've got a lot going on, and for a hard thing for me is to switch off. Yeah. And to compartmentalize and say, okay, your day's over. This is your time with your kids. And sometimes I find myself being with my kids in the same room and my thoughts are somewhere else. Yeah. How do you
struggle for everybody, for sure. And I think it's even more so when you work at home, that probably even just not having those physical boundaries of like your mental, great question. So, unfortunately, my dad always he worked a ton and worked hard, but he was always present. And when he left work, he would shut it off. He just shut it off.
It's a skill.
And so I like that. I always had, just by watching him to some degree. And also in manufacturing, there's not a lot you can do after hours. I mean, there's always something to work on, granted. Yeah. So I got to a place 2 years ago where it was actually when we were when we had lost our home and we were having to remediate it. And meanwhile, we had bought the next home and we're starting the plans for remodeling it. And, we were just busy at work. I was overwhelmed, right? And just totally maxed out. And a friend of mine referred me to a group program called Rise Up Kings. And so that really, I was I'd always did well at turning it off when I get home, mm-hmm. and I'll get to in a minute some strategies and things that I have to do to help me with that. Yeah, for sure. But I wasn't living a balanced life, right? I worked my tail off, and I had for a long time, and everything I did, I was 110%, and so you can't be 110% in everything. Yeah, and the Rise Up Kings is built on 4 pillars, and it's faith, family, fitness, and finance, in that order. Finance being your business life, whatever your work is. So typically as an executive, or really anybody, you're going to be crushing it in 2 or 3 of those areas and struggling in 1, right. If you're a high performer, you're going to be doing it in maybe 3, but very rarely all 4, because you're extremist typically if you're a high performer and you're not able to balance. Right. So, going through that program really gave me some tools to help me live more balanced, especially working on my health and my fitness. Yeah. And just being more intentional as a father, and more intentional with, getting what I need in terms of spiritually, emotionally, physically. And so, systematically they have these 4 pillars, and And basically, I have an app for it, but you could download a habits app. You could do, a multitude of ways, but essentially I do 2 things for each of the pillars every day. It's, read the Bible and pray for the faith aspect. There's also 2
So you
extra.
dedicate specific time in your day.
Oh
for
yeah,
that.
yeah. And there's 2 extra bonus points for journaling and writing 3 gratitudes, which I do the gratitudes twice a day, once in the morning and once before I go to bed. And then the invest in your marriage, invest in your kids. That's something intentional. So not just being your normal, like, great dad, great husband. It's like writing a note to your daughters or writing a note to your wife or like stopping in the middle of your day to call her or coming home early from work or just doing something intentional. And like, I was always a really good dad and husband, I think, but I wasn't intentional. So it forced you to take that next step.
That's great. Yeah. That's something that I would definitely love to implement.
Yeah. I would love to help you with that.
Yeah. Cause I mean, I have my own version of the faith thing, but it's the same idea. It's what I start my day with, and I end my day with it. So there's journaling involved there, but the intentionality of doing something, and it comes and goes. Sometimes I will, but it's not. It's more at a whim as opposed to an intention. Say, hey, what am I going to do today for her or for the kids?
For sure.
It's a great.
It's tough, man. It's tough to do intentionally regularly. And then for the fitness, it's start your day with a healthy, breakfast or start off on the right foot in terms of health, what you eat, and have a routine with that, and then work out. And then for finance, it's plan your day. So what are your top targets for the day and the week, and review your schedule for the day. So like make sure you know what you're trying to accomplish that week each day, like and set those targets and hit them, and then learn something new. So spend 15 minutes listening to a book, a podcast, whatever. Mm-hmm. And those are the 10 actions that I do. I was looking back just as I was wondering how much I've been doing. I've been doing it for 20 months or 22 months. And I've got like 5,700 points. So I was like, just curious. I was like, I wonder what my average is going into this, as we were just preparing and talking.
Right.
And so it's like, I'm averaging about 8.5 over the last 22 months.
That's great. So that's kind of helped you kind of balance things to a certain point.
Yeah.
And, do you struggle, since you've been able to balance it, do you struggle with the balance between the ambition and the contentment? Like
totally, dude.
Driving for success without feeling like you're losing touch with what truly matters?
Yeah, I think that, everything, it's a constant struggle, especially because like my whole life, my dad told me I try to do too much. So like I've always, hence why I have so much on my plate. And so just finding that balance and it's like yesterday, I wanted to cancel my workout. Because I just had too much going on, and I was like, no, like the work will get done, and I just need to do the workout, and I felt way better after I did. Mm. And so one thing I've really learned recently is being instead of doing, and so like most people focus on doing certain things so that they can be the person they want to be.
Yeah.
And so doing certain things so they can have the things they want to have so that they can be the person they want to be.
Versus experiencing the process.
Yeah. But if you just flip that on its head, it's like you can already be who you want to be today. Right? Like if you focus on who you are and who you want to be as a person, mm-hmm. and you write those affirmations every day, mm-hmm. like you're going to do the things you need to do to be that person. Mm. Instead of focusing, I got to do this, and this. And like, I realized kind of through they have a secondary program at Rise Up Kings called The Forge. And I went through that. And my whole life, my identity was, I don't care what other people think, which is like, I was just like, that was who I am. And it was affirmed, like it was grown because that works in life. Like if you don't care what people think, like that, it works. Like you're the cool kid. Right. And then like it's, and
not to look at that as a detriment. It's not like doing things intentionally to harm people and not caring. Yeah. It's more about following your own drum, your own drum, and just where the chips fall where they may. Don't care what people say based on what is the right thing to do or the right things. Yeah,
and like even just the way I've always dressed, like I've always just been different. Like it's why I fit in good with the band, right?
Yeah. But 4th of July, baby, you're the king of the outfits, man.
Yeah, thank you. I have fun with it, but through that process, I realized like if I'm really overextending myself and overworking myself. And like, I actually really, that's rooted in people pleasing. It's either rooted in like a desire to have something that you don't have, or rooted in people pleasing, and because it's all performance based.
Right.
And so for me, like Colossians 3:23 is my life verse. Do whatever you do. Whatever you do it with all your heart, as if working for the Lord, and you will not receive earthly treasure, you will receive heavenly treasure. That's like what fueled me and allowed me to, it's what motivated me. But then, so I always thought like, I'm working hard because I want to do it for the glory of God. And this is my work, is my ministry. But what I realized when I got to the root of it, it's like, if that was the case, I wouldn't be overextending myself and overperforming. And so understanding like that, it's okay if things don't get done, right? Like it's okay to say no to an opportunity.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And, I mean, you just have to get better at saying no and just like living a more balanced life and focus on being instead of doing. Yeah. And I've got a bunch of tools that I use to help myself. Back to the intentionality. You know, I've got app blockers. So like my phone shuts down at 9 o'clock. I can't access it without, going through multiple overrides to get to it. I use an app called Opal. There's a lot of other ones out there. There's other ones that I think are better, but, and even just like having family time blocked off, just different time management. There's so many, tips and tricks out there for time management. That, and then also just like the relentless or the ruthless elimination of hurry. Hurry and busyness is killing everybody. And busy is like this idol of like, everybody wants to be busy. You know what I mean? And like, you look at Jesus, he was never in a hurry ever. And he's regarded as the greatest leader of all time by, believers and non. I mean, he started the largest, following in the world. And so, like I have a bunch of like things that I do to just ruthlessly eliminate hurry from my life. And it's even silly things like driving the far right lane. Like I've never not just driven 8 to 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. I still go a little bit over, but like I don't speed ever, so just coming to complete stops at stop signs, getting in the longest line at the grocery store. That one's painful for me. I've done that a few times.
That's testing.
Like, but also just, little things like having your phone, parent your phone, right? Like have that, I have to protect myself from myself. Yeah. And I have to use tools to do that. And then accountability. We all need accountability in life. Like if that's the only way that you're going to succeed, is by having others hold you accountable. And so in order to do that, you got to be willing to live transparently and have others speak into that. And so I've got several spheres of accountability that really helps me, where I've got a small group that I meet with weekly through church. That's more of a life group. And then I have a business CEO Christian group that we meet monthly. And like we have a wheel of like every different facet of life, and we have to grade ourselves 0 to 10 on all of those. And the idea of the wheel is you want it to be balanced.
What are some of those?
So it's your marriage, your family, rest and retreat. So rest is like sleep, retreat is having fun. Your diet, your working out. What else is on there? Business, relationships, community being like your small group, and finances. And so you rate yourself 0 to 10, and like just having a balance, life is so just having multiple layers of accountability and tools in place to help you protect yourself from yourself. Cause like we're all just going to follow the desires of our heart and do it, and we're all so consumed by our phones that it's like,
oh man, tell me about
and
it.
Everything and all the media is designed to suck you in. Like, Netflix, like they start the next show right away, it's like it's such a time killer.
I was just talking to a professor I had a couple of days ago on the podcast, and I'll say it again. One of the reasons why I took a pause from the podcast was because I know that if I wanted to do something with it, I would have to post regularly on social media. And that means now like 4 platforms, right? Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, right? And then YouTube. And I was like, there's no way I want to do this. And then thanks to AI, I've got this tool, Opus Clips. Essentially, it's like it takes the clips, it cuts them for you, and then you can schedule the posts to go out. So it's like on one day a week, on a Monday or on a Friday, depending on when I'm posting, I'll have the clips ready to go. They're scheduled to go out, and I don't have to look at my phone.
That's
so that
amazing.
was like a big using technology to your advantage too, to help like the apps.
Totally.
Because it can be a blessing and a curse, right? If you know how to manage it well, you can use it to your advantage. advantage, right? Whether it's promoting your business or advertising or whatever it is. But if you let that thing suck you in, it's really easy because it knows what you like. You know?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and just giving yourself back time, because I mean, it's like you think about every time you're most of the times when you're in an argument with your wife, like typically it's because you're in a hurry, right? Like, you know, like when are you ever in a hurry and loving and gentle towards other people?
I got tested this morning with Ellie, and I was like kicking myself in the teeth for doing this, for losing my patience. I gotta say, like, I've been talking about a lot of stoicism, and it's really changed my life for myself, because I talked about this with the theologian from a couple of days ago, because I've had a hard time, and we talked about this too, me finding God in that sense, because it was hard for me to relate with something so personified, you know, like a being, as opposed to just a more spiritual side of things. So this has resonated well with me. So part of the philosophy involves living with 4 key virtues, which are the same cardinal virtues that came later through the Christian church, which is, you know, wisdom, temperance or moderation, and then courage, and then justice, how you treat other people, and fairness, and patience being one of them. And this morning when she came down late for breakfast, and we were in a hurry, and she didn't want that. She started whining about wanting something else, and I could have handled it in so many different ways, but I chose to raise my voice. And you know, it's not, you know, is it at the end of the world? At the end of the day, no. But I know that I'm teaching her bad habits. I'm you know, teaching her that's so how we respond. Man. That's how, it's hard, but that's how we respond to in situations where we're hurried. Whereas you have to get creative, you have to think on your toes. But if you let that be the last resort, then you'll enjoy it, and you'll have taught the people you love something, a way to manage and make themselves better without feeling like it has to resort to screaming, you know?
Yeah.
So I agree with you on that wholeheartedly. It's one of the hardest things to put into place, especially today with how busy everything is, right? How like, I got to do this, I got to do that, I got to, you know? Yeah.
Well, and like the phones, like that actually like compounds the busyness. Like even if you don't feel like you're a busy person, if you're on your phone constantly, you're busy. You're busy. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's consuming you.
Yeah. Yeah. Another reason why I took the social medias off the phone, they're just on my computer.
Oh, that's smart. That's one of the steps of the Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. That's an amazing book for anyone and everyone.
What's that?
Ruthless Elimination of Hurry.
Okay.
Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. It's really, really good. A lot of tips and tricks on how to eliminate hurry from your life.
What? So aside from patience, what other like character traits or virtues or anything that you try to live by the most, that you feel like give you the most out of your life and that will bring you the most happiness?
Man, it's a good question. I just believe that if I follow Jesus and love, like he laid down his life for us, right? Like he washed his disciples' feet. And back then they had sandals and there were, cows on the road. Like washing feet back then is like far different from washing feet now. You know what I mean? Like the God of the universe came and washed the feet of his people that followed him. And then laid down his life for those, and not just for those, but for even like people that rejected him. I mean, he's on the cross, forgive them, Father, they know not what they do, to the Roman soldiers who were spitting on him and mocking him. And I just want to live more like him every day. And the only way I can live more like him every day is to know him better and to follow him in his ways and just, and so I believe that if I do that, then like the virtues that I want to live by will play itself out. But, some affirmations that I'm pursuing right now and focused on is, I'm a patient, vulnerable, humble, and playful man. So like, I'm not naturally patient, obviously, but I'm working on that. And I believe by affirming it in my mind and in my core being of who I am, that I can be patient. Right. And certainly having 2 girls and a wife helps with that.
For sure. Tess.
And
having the playful nature that you do have in general, like you've always been that way, is great for kids. I mean,
thank you. And I lost it. Like I really lost it because of just being so in manufacturing, everything's about efficiency. Right. And so to go back to that, like hurry, element, like my whole life, everything I do is like focused on efficiency naturally. And so, I lost a little bit of that playfulness and just how, just in the pursuit of efficiency and trying to manage everything. And so that's something I'm really trying to get back to. And then just God revealed to me that like, while people have told me I'm vulnerable and humble, I realized that there's a lot of area to grow in that. And so, those are virtues that I'm currently working on and really implanting into my identity. Because, I think that to be a good leader, you need to be playful, right? Like with your kids, like everybody, it's like, especially like life's hard, work's hard.
Might as well make it like, enjoyable.
If we can't
somewhat.
have fun doing it, like that's always say like the worst task ever, like having to like suffer through like, like some physical task or whatever. Like the only way to make it better is to laugh about it. You know what I mean? To laugh about how bad it sucks, right? And like make, have fun with it. And so, and just have a good perspective of like, I say, this is pain is the path, right? Like all things that are hard are generally worth it in life. And so like marriage, right? Like there's not much harder than marriage. And like you're supposed to be putting the other person first for the rest of your life. Right. So, by doing that, it's just like you realize that because of how hard it is, that's also the most rewarding. Yeah. Right? Like a good marriage is the most rewarding thing you can ever have. And but it takes constant hard work. Yeah. Right? And so that's just the story of life. And so like the harder things are, like the more rewarding the other side will be, and just having that perspective.
Yeah, man, that makes sense. You were talking earlier about personal responsibility. You said you have it's important to you having that personal responsibility. Do you think it comes from does it come from like a fear of failure? Do you think either as for your work as a father or husband, like fear that things might lose control, that you feel that, or how do you ever have those fears?
Not really. I mean, there's always like the enemy wants to attack you with fear always, right? Fear is, directly from the enemy. But I think for me, it was like more so finding my identity, like unbeknownst to myself, in being a top performer. And like, it got sideways a little bit because it started like really when I understood Colossians 3:23. And like, I went from throwing parties for a living to taking a pay cut to doing payroll and journal entries at All Metals. And I'm like, what am I doing here, God? Is this what, should I be in ministry, vocationally? And that's when I learned that verse. It's like, no, whatever you do, if you're sweeping the floors at working as a janitor, you do that to the glory of God, you're going to get eternal treasure for it. Like, because your work is a form of worship. Like we were created to work. In the garden, the first thing he told Adam to do was to take care of the garden and cultivate it. And he had work, and so work has since taken a fallen nature. But anyways, I pursued it in that way. And so it's a good, healthy thing because it gave me, when I realized that, I went from being a guy that got to work I punch in, punch out at like the time that I had to be there, right, to the guy that was the first one there and the last to leave. And so it started out as like a good thing that I'm doing it for the glory of God. But I think that, just the sinful nature of ourselves, like underneath it all was a desire to also perform at a top level, either for my own identity or for the approval of others. I don't really know what was at the root of it. Yeah.
Was this before you had kids or was this after having kids?
I just realized that like, this January. So like
I've
9 months
ago. Thing
yeah.
With teaching, it's been the same kind of aspect.
Yeah. I just realized like, whoa, like my whole life I thought I didn't really care what people think about me. And that was like part of my identity. And like what made me realize it was we were doing this exercise at this deal and this guy, so I'm like, I'm saying these guys have no idea who I am. And I tell them what I was saying. And then they start giving me feedback about like, and it was related to my identity. And these guys start giving me feedback, and I like felt the need to defend myself of what I meant by what I was saying. And the leader of the group was like, why do you need to defend yourself? And I'm like, I don't know. He's like, it comes across as defensive instead of just like, if they're wrong, like who cares? And that was like, that just like gut punched me. I was like, maybe I do care what people think. Yeah. and then some other events and things that happened over the course of that experience made me realize that there's something deeper there. Otherwise, I wouldn't be burning myself out.
So that coupled with your faith kind of helped you come to that realization.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What about kids? Because for me, I that accountability and not wanting to provide for them, and that being there, putting yourself putting them in front of yourself, and saying, regardless, I have this career. It may not be, even if it's not the career that you think you're destined for, right? You've got it, but you're doing it for your kids, I think is a good motivation for a lot of people.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think there's also that as humans, our desires are to want more. I had the same thing happen to me about a year and a half ago. I went down this path of trying to find all these alternate things to do, because I was like, I fell into teaching. I'm still producing music a little bit, but I'm mostly teaching. I've got a full load of students. I'm in the back of my mind, I didn't know if I hated it or I felt guilty because I either wasn't making the money I thought I'd be making or making the difference that I thought I'd be making. Maybe because I didn't choose the path directly and it kind of appeared itself to me, Yeah,
totally.
So I was like, what, and I was hitting 40, so it's like that midlife crisis
Yeah.
thing, questioning all these things. And then finally, kind of a similar. It was later than that for me. It was like about 3 or 4 months ago, actually. This kind of light bulb went up, and I was like, wait. You're shaping the lives of these kids. You have kids that you've been teaching for 5 or 6 years. You're putting an indelible mark on their lives for the better, and you're teaching them something that's going to stick with them. Teaching them how to work hard. Teaching them about responsibility. Teaching them about accountability. What do you hear? What are you complaining here about? So that was an eye opener for me, and there's also this another Stoic saying called amor fati, which is love your fate. I'd always been in the back of my mind that I could always make my fate whatever I want it to be, but that was an illusion. Going back to what we were saying about there's only so much you can control, right? You can plan for everything that you want as much as possible, but at the end of the day, what's going to happen is going to happen. Mm-hmm. And I think that acceptance really helped me just loosen the load on the pressures that were there in the back of my mind, if that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah. I think that, it's a lot of what you were saying really resonated with me. And yeah, I mean, being a parent's hard and great, but also great motivation to provide. And I think that so much in society, tells us that you got to find where your passion meets a need that meets, especially the Gen Z group. And,
it's so much of it's for the self. It's crazy. So much of it is geared towards the self.
And the reality is none of it's going to satisfy. It might make it easier, but I really believe that in order to not to have deep, continual motivation for the course of your life to work, you need to have a proper theology of work, and that we were created to work, and work is a good thing and a form of worship to God. And if that's what motivates you, you'll have an enduring persistence to pursue it. And it won't be, for example,
it won't be drudgery.
Yeah. And there'll be hard moments because work is designed to be hard. That also grows your faith and grows your character. Yeah. But if you're doing it for a paycheck, it's never going to be enough.
Yeah.
And if you're doing it to be a really good performer, whether it be for your boss or for yourself or for your kids, it's going to be a complete and total grind that's going to burn you out, because you're never going to be satisfied with performing good enough,
because you feel like you're doing it for somebody else.
Exactly. Yeah. Even doing it for yourself to if you're doing it for your own identity to be a top performer, what's good enough, right? When is it ever enough?
Right.
It's never. And so really believing that your work, no matter what you do, I think that if you could be a janitor and do it to the glory of God, and I don't mean to keep using that example, whatever, a restaurant, service person, a police officer, whatever, like you have to have a deeper motivation because your kids are going to graduate, they're going to be out of the house, and like, then what's going to motivate you to work then? Right. And I think just having is it ideal to find the place where your talents meets your passion, that meets a need in the society? Yeah, that's great. But that's like 1% of people.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like the rest of us are just like trying to steward our talents and provide for our families. And so coming to grips with the fact that like there's no point of arrival, with work, and it's going to be hard. And if you are doing it for the glory of God and as a form of worship to Him, then you will have a deep, continual motivation.
Yeah, that's well put. As a soon-to-be dad of a son coming up soon, do you feel like that it will be different, obviously, than the 2 girls? How are you preparing for that mentally, and how to you is that different than your relationship that you have with your 2 daughters? And this is, of course, speculating because you haven't had kids yet.
Yeah, man. I think about that. I think it's going to be so unique. I think that, I am, I'm extremely excited about it. I've looked forward to it my whole life. And there's just certain things you can pass on to a son. Like ultimately I'm teaching and discipling my daughters, but not to be like me. Right. Like they're women. Right. And so, there's something different about being able to pour into a son, and that I'm very excited about. And, I've been God's been preparing me for the last 20 years, or really my whole life, and so fortunately, I had a great dad and great example. And I'm just, looking to build off of the things that he's taught me and do even better,
Right.
And, so I'm excited, man. And, I think the thing that makes me more nervous is like having 3 kids and like juggling that, like with my wife. It's just like, our 2-year-old is a real handful. And just the dynamic of how she's going to respond to that. And like just the amount of, I can handle a lot. But Ashley's different. Right. And like one thing I could not be is a stay-at-home mom. I could never do that job. I mean, by Sunday evening, I'm ready to go back to work.
Right. Yeah.
I'm worn out, man. So it impacts her a lot more. So I'm more nervous about like how it impacts her, and because that ultimately impacts me and all of us in our family.
Yeah.
So, but I'm excited for her too, because I think girls love their daddies when they're young. Like my girls are like daddy's girls. But sons generally at young age are like the mom is like it's very instrumental. So Ashley was like, I need to have a boy just so I can have one that adores me, which our girls do totally adore her. But anyway, so she's excited about it too.
That's great. What does it mean to teach your son to be a man when he grows up? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, I think, a godly man lives humbly, lives courageous, speaks truth, and just lives authentically, meaning transparently, and serves the king, so looks to live for others and put others first. And I think that's a good, I've got some, a lot of different material on, biblical manhood but I think that's how I would just off the hip, without knowing that question was coming, to answer it.
Yeah. Do you think that definition is different from what modern day society of what it is to be a man is?
Oh man, yeah. We live in a culture where, the emasculation of men has been going on for, decades, and we're made out to be bad people. And I think that it all started with even the original sin was Adam being passive, right? Like Eve ate the apple, he sat there and watched her, right? Like he was passive leader, and that's the downfall of men, is being passive. And so, I think that that's also just created this narrative of, and then people mold to that identity, right? And
right.
So,
that if you're not passive, you're just aggressive.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Right. And the emasculation, but is like pushing us into more passivity.
Right.
And like as leaders and as men, like you should not be passive. Like you need to be intentional and courageous. And so, yeah, the narrative in the world today is terrifying, but the one thing that's encouraging is, with our generation, you see dads a lot more involved. And I think it's a lot because more both parents work.
Yeah.
And so they kind of have to be. It's
That's
a more split duties.
Culture shift in that sense.
Yeah. But even in my house, my wife is a stay-at-home mom. I'm from the time I get home to the time I go to bed, like it's pretty much all me. You know what I mean? Like, she helps too. I'm not saying that, but I'm very involved, right? And so I think that I've been encouraged to see just men of our generation stepping it up and changing. It's like my father-in-law jokes. He's never changed a diaper before.
Right. No, my dad probably never changed diapers, but I've changed a ton.
Yeah. If I'm home, I'm changing it.
Yeah.
Is my rule. You know what I mean? Like if I'm home, I'm changing it.
So that doesn't. Would you say in the classical sense of what it is to be a man, would that contradict with that? Because
somewhat, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people who are adverse to the whole toxic masculinity that's out are like, oh, men don't want to change diapers. But I don't think that's what our definition of being a man is. A man is fine changing diapers. A man's fine wearing pink. These stupid little cliches.
Yeah.
But so what on a deeper level? When you say to lead, for example, I think that's a good one to kind of say, because a lot of people might hear that and say, oh, so women can't lead, Yeah,
oh, totally, women can lead.
So can you expand on that?
Yeah, I think the other version of manhood, which is like, let's call it like 50s, 60s, 70s manhood, and which is our fathers ultimately, like, and I'm not saying this about your father or mine, but I think that mindset of is like, I'm a provider and I'm present, and that's my job. You know what I mean? Whereas like it's like
duty versus just
when it's like that it's also like if that's your posture of your heart, like you're not being authentic.
You're not being present.
You're not when you're not being humble either, right? Like it's not like a real man is humble. Like previous generations were taught like we don't like guys don't talk about their emotions and like we're just going to cut up and like BS, but real authentic manhood, like real friendships are when you know everything about me and I know everything about you. And like, we're going to live transparently. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think that like wall of masculinity was what kind of shaped that stereotype of I'm not changing diapers. I'm not, this or that. But a real man's humble and like seeks to serve others, right? And I think that that's biblical manhood. And as it relates to leading, women leading and men, like absolutely women are leaders. It just in different situations it looks different, right? Mm-hmm. And so like a woman CEO looks very similar to a man CEO in the way that like she should lead her company, right? Mm-hmm. A mom, as she leads the family, is different in ways than the man leads the family, right? Mm-hmm. And so they should complement each other, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that to take it to a biblical sense, and this is going to get controversial, but like, I think that the man is the leader of the house, right? Biblically, but that has to be looked at in the reference of what is defined as the leader in the Bible. And that is Jesus died for his people, right? And so in the church and in the Bible, it talks about the reference to marriage is between Jesus and the church. And so as a man, like in that dichotomy of like Jesus and the church are married and like he's the head of the church, but he laid down his life literally for his bride. And so in the same way, men, if you're the leader of your house, like you should be laying down your life for your bride. And that frees her up to lead in the areas that she wants to, Mm-hmm. I mean, like she makes the decisions on what we're eating and what, schooling and different things. And like, she speaks into the parenting and helps educate me on parenting. And so while you might say, okay, well, that's an old school view. It's like, well, do you want to go lay down your life every day and put your wife's needs before your own? That's a pretty hard thing to do. Most people are selfish. You know what I mean? Like dying to yourself's the hardest thing to do. And so I think that absolutely men and women's leaders, women are totally, absolutely leaders and should be. I would say, like, as a follower of Jesus, everybody's called to be a leader. And I just think it looks different inside of different relationships and different institutions, and that it should and could. It would be the way I'd answer that.
Yeah. What about, you mentioned pacifism earlier. A lot of people would consider Jesus being passive, and that's why we need to clear up the definition of what you mean by passive, because a lot of people who are, in the war, anti-war kind of narrative, passive is got its own definition, right? Of being pacifists in war, right? Yeah. What is your definition of passive?
That's a good question. Not taking action when you know you should at the root of your core.
So courage too.
Yeah. I mean, to combat passivity, you have to have courage. Like that's the opposite of, I'd say, courageous and passive.
Yeah.
I think that, like, Jesus was meek, and the definition of meek is having power but not showing it, right? And so that's I think people hear meek and they're like, oh, that's weak and soft. And, like, no, he was incredibly powerful. Like, there's nothing more.
I think it takes courage to be able to die.
Yeah.
And then be able to say, and have the courage to say, forget, to not sit there, first of all, and cry and scratch and squeal and try to save your life.
Yeah,
and
which
run
he could have gotten off the cross. He was God. He could have just gotten himself off. But
right. And be able to take that and then to try to prove a point.
Yeah. And there's nothing more powerful than having power and choosing to not show it. Right. And so I think that that things can make him come across as passive, but the people that he hit heads with the most were the religious, the Pharisees, right? Like those were the people that were prideful. And, like, to those people, he wasn't passive at all. I mean, he flipped over tables in the temple and called out the Pharisees every chance he get. And so, like, one thing I'm anti-religion. Like, I'm just about following Jesus. And Jesus was anti-religion. Like, religion is a way of controlling people through a set of rules.
Yeah, we talked yesterday with the professor about how the ego interjects itself into religion to create these...
Catholicism. Yeah. Sorry. Said that I should cut that.
To create, basically to create these giant organizations that kind of, quote unquote, bastardize the true essence of what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's why Jesus came to, like, clash with those people, because he's like, ultimately, religion is all about being good enough. And he's like, you can never be good enough. Like, you're not perfect. Like, nobody's perfect. Everybody, the foot at the cross is all equal. You know what I mean? There's perfection and there's not. Yeah. And so all he wanted people to do is to put others first, to love God and love others. Those two commandments, if you just do that, love God and love others, everything else can take care of itself. That fulfills all the commandments.
Do you think faith provides psychological comfort against uncertainty and the unknown? And how do you feel like this affects your overall mental health?
Yeah, I think that, like, that's a great question. I think that, like, is faith like a crutch? Is like,
right,
right, like
as a coping mechanism.
Yeah, coping mechanism or crutch. Like, I think that that's such an interesting. I'm like, yes, it's like.
But what's wrong with that?
Yeah, it is. But, like, I think it's like, but. It's just recognize there's no place better to be than to recognize I can't do this. I can't control this. And so I'm trusting in, a greater power to do that. And so, I think that it totally is, and that's okay. As long as, like I said, I've done the work to go study all the other religions and really, like, decide what I truly believe at the core of my core. I think that a blind faith is not really faith, right? Like, I think that will show, and will, when the storms come, if you have a blind faith that's not rooted in truth and rooted in, like, you believing it at your core, then it's not going to work when the storm hits.
What's a blind faith?
Like somebody just believing something without really like believing it at their core, you know, like doing the work to figure out what they really believe, like like a wish-washy faith, so to speak.
Did you feel like that when you were exploring and trying to find your faith?
Yeah, totally.
Because you weren't completely sure.
Yeah, that was what really reaffirmed my faith, was like just putting in the time to go study everything else and be like, I came to the realization, you know, like I said earlier, like people are always like, Jesus is a good guy, he was a good teacher. I was like, he really can't be. Like he claimed to be God. So he's either a liar, a lunatic, or who he says he was.
Or maybe his definition of God isn't what we can conceive of it as, because one of my big qualms with truly having this blind faith towards Christianity or Judaism to a certain extent is the personification of a deity, right? But maybe Jesus's definition of what God is just not something that's so personified. It's like something that I'm living God. If what resonates with me in Stoicism is that God is logos, which is just the natural laws of the universe, and it is what it is. Meaning, like, we in nature as humans are meant to be to use our logic and our minds to be the best version of ourselves as we can be, following these 4 virtues, right? And that's just the way it is. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So he, you know, when he says God, you know, you have to ask yourself, what does he mean by that? You know?
I mean, if you read the scriptures and read his quotes, I think it's pretty clear that what he meant by it. And I mean, ultimately, like, he was crucified for claiming to be God, right? So, I mean, that's a good point. But I think if you read what all he said, like, I am the way, the truth, and the light. Nobody goes to heaven except through me. He says nobody comes to the Father, but that's heaven. He said your sins are forgiven, right? Like, you know, he said a lot of things. He called himself I am Yahweh, you know, and which was God's most holy name for himself. He called himself that. And so he did all those things to let us know that he was claiming to be God. And so I just don't think he could be a good person or a good teacher if he wasn't who he says
lying,
it.
Right.
Yeah. And so, you know, when you look at that combined with the hundreds of prophecies that he fulfilled, which is just literally mind blowing. If you haven't studied that, you need to look into that. The city he was born, that he died on a cross, that he moved whenever Nero tried to kill all the babies, and it forced him to move. So he was born in Bethlehem, but came from Nazareth.
Nero was crazy.
Yeah. He rode in on a donkey. I mean, there's some that he could control himself. So like he could fulfill that, but like he couldn't fulfill where he was born.
Yeah.
Right. Like, gosh, there's so many. What else? I've just got put on the spot here. I just named off like 5 or 6.
Good. That's good. Yeah.
Even the way that he died, that he would bleed out, like it talked. I mean, there's one in Isaiah that just like literally describes the crucifixion to a T. He's from the bloodline of David. That was a prophecy thoroughly. I think even Born of a Virgin was one. There's hundreds. As it coming from Judaism, like that's something you should look into, and I can send you some resources on it.
Yeah,
that's been always like I think why the Jewish people originally rejected it then was because they were expecting a king to come and free them from slavery from the Roman Empire. Mm-hmm. That was also prophecies. It was a king that would be established forever. Right. And so he was a king to come and free them from the slavery of sin, the slavery of religiosity,
not literal slavery. Right?
Yeah. And so that threw them off. And then I think just the pride of like, hey, you're trying to disrupt our religion, and like we're like based on doing good. And so it just, it breaks my heart that like that it's missed, you know. It's like we are both children of Abraham, right? Like as a Jewish, you know, person and as a follower of Jesus, like we sing the Father Abraham song in my house all the time, and we're both, you know, children of Abraham, and so we come from the same. It's just this one thing that's being like, we have the same part of our Bible's the exact same, you know.
Same with Muslims.
yeah. They got sideways somewhere else, but nonetheless, it's the same original faith, right? Actually, as well, but more so with Christianity and Judaism. For sure. But you're right.
Yeah. Well, thanks, man. I appreciate you coming today, man.
Dude, this is awesome, man.
Great conversation.
Yeah, part 2.
Yeah, for sure, man. Good stuff. Love you too, man. That was great.
Thank you so much.